session with routing algorithms. So what is actually a routing should be known to us. So routing algorithms determine the end-to-end path through the network. Okay, so you have got multiple routing algorithms which help you to understand the exact route or a path, a specific packet to take to reach the destination, and it also enriches the routers with this information, which is called as routing table, where all these routing informations are populated. Right. So routing table is otherwise called as forwarding table. This determines the local forwarding at the specific router. We have spoken about ARP earlier. So it understands where the packet has to be forwarded as the next hop. So that decision is taken by the router based on the routing information which is available in the routing table, or in other words, the forwarding table. And this is taken care by opening up your packet, which is called the network layer PDU at the router. Check with the router's header, the IP header having the destination network address or destination IP address plays a key role in determining the path your packet has to take. Right. So this is what router header examination is happening, and then the routing decisions are taken. We also have learnt about the graph abstraction. This is important for you to understand the link state routing protocol logic as well as distance vector routing protocol logic. And in the DVRP, in the distance vector routing protocol, from every of the specific node, or in other words, the router, we were attempting to find the shortest path for every other routers in the network. In the networking topology, from one router, we attempt to find out the least cost path in to reach any specific network. Okay, that's what is happening. But in general, what happens in the routing algorithm, broadly it is classified into two. One is static algorithm, the other one is dynamic algorithm. Okay, in the case of static algorithm, we call it a static routing protocol, where we used to give the configuration. Hope you remember: IP route, target network address, and then subnet mask with the exit interface or next hop IP. That's how we configure the static routing in the static algorithms. In the case of dynamic, we go for configuring the specific algorithm in the router, for instance, RIP or OSPF or EHRP and so on, and then they take care of the routing information to be exchanged among the routers. Okay, in the case of dynamic, we always say it is having some advantage over the static, because it does not need the administrator to intervene often into the network's operation. Whereas in the case of static routing, the story is otherwise, where every of the link change has to be reflected in the routing table by the manual intervention of the network administrator. In other direction, the routing algorithms are classified into two other major kind of classification. They are global or decentralized. Okay, in other words, link state routing algorithms or link state routing protocols or distance vector routing protocols. In the case of link state routing protocol, if you wanted to make a comparison, every of the router knows the entire topology. Okay, the complete connectivity of the network is known by every of the router, whereas in the distance vector routing protocol, they all know only their neighbors. When the routing informations are exchanged in the case of decentralized or the distance vector routing protocol, the entire routing table is exchanged, whereas in the link state routing protocol, the link cost changes are exchanged. And in other words, fast convergence is given by the link state routing protocol compared to distance vector routing protocol. Generally, in distance vector routing protocol, it goes for periodic update, whereas in the link state routing protocol, it goes for triggered updates. But even in the EHRP, we go for the triggered updates. That's the improvement in the DVRP. Yeah, that's the fundamental. These are the fundamental differences between the link state routing protocol and the distance vector routing protocol. The third kind of classification comes under whether it is sensitive to load or not. But never mind about load sensitive or load insensitive, because of the higher performance of the links which we have at present, and also the speed of the link and the reliability. Load sensitive or load insensitive is not at all a matter. Nobody bothers about whether it is heavily loaded or not. Okay, so that classification takes the backseat in any of the discussion. So moving on, a simple link state routing protocol follows the Dijkstra shortest path algorithm. All right, it goes for n number of iterations. We know how to calculate it. I want you guys to remember this logic. The very important thing is this formula which is given. Okay, this is something similar to your link state routing protocol as well as you learn about that. Okay, at any time after you have traversed through a node from the source to the destination, you will find out which is the shortest path, whether it is through the newly traversed node or the existing node. If it is through the newly traversed node, that is taken up. Otherwise, the existing is taken up. That's what is achieved by the formula which is given on the screen. That is the um, uh, that is the minimum of distance to the specific node and the distance to the current node and the path and the link cost between these two nodes. All right, so that is taken up, the minimum value is taken up and which is included into the path cost. All right. Moving on, I don't dwell a lot here. We have learned about this earlier, so I go quickly. But when you talk about the Dijkstra's algorithm, it also faces oscillation of route. Hope you remember that, because the path cost plays a major role. If it is routing information protocol, the hop count is taken as the metric, but in general, the path cost is taken as the metric. You can see we remember the oscillation which is faced by the link state routing protocol, especially because of the Dijkstra shortest path algorithm. Okay, the route gets oscillated because of the change in the load. And also the complexity of the algorithm, it goes for it has to compare with every other node, hence the number of comparison becomes n into n plus 1 by 2, gives a big O of n square, which is mm, not a recommended one. And I have made a request to you earlier. I hope you would have done it. That you will find the most efficient implementation of it. Probably a better performing algorithm which takes only big O of n log n, which is somewhat better than big O of n square. It may be in your rough notebook or in the class notes. I hope and believe that you would have done it. All right. So okay, this I have spoken. Then about the distance vector routing protocol, we have got the Bell-Manford algorithm, comes under the dynamic programming. We know the formula. I thank one of your classmates who took the responsibility of explaining this to the class. So this is what the slide which I prepared to explain to you, but I do not want to reiterate because every one of you are made clear about how this DVRP is functioning. All right. So every of the node in the case of DVRP exchanges the routing information with its neighboring router. All right. So how can we compare the link state and DVRP, which I have already done it? The message complexity is probably higher in link state than the distance vector routing protocol, but the speed of convergence is very high in the case of link state routing protocols. All right. And but none of the protocols, whether it is link state routing protocol or distance routing protocol, they are not very robust. What do you mean by robust? When you even if the network has some error, your algorithm should not be troubled much about that. Okay, that's what the robustness. So in that case, link state routing algorithm somewhat performs better than your distance vector routing protocol. Now, otherwise, they all in the same boat. None of them can be exempted from this kind, to be a victim of router malfunctioning. All right, so that brings the end to that. I have other things. Okay, I have got something on the hierarchical routing. I have shared the screen of hierarchical routing. Please tell me if this is not visible to you. Okay, moving on. So I have given some assignment. This is the same presentation which I am giving you, which I have used to handle the class, and I'm sure you have submitted the assignments earlier. Why should we have the hierarchical routing? There are two things. One is about the scalability, other one is the administrative autonomy. I have used this to learn about the scalability. We all have understood the necessity of the autonomous autonomy. Why should we have autonomous system, the scalability and the administrative autonomy, which you have dealt a lot earlier. Okay, and we also should know what is an autonomous system and what are all the intra-autonomous system, where do you require inter-autonomous system, what is a gateway router, and so on. In this topology which is shown on the screen, you have got three autonomous systems, namely autonomous system 1, autonomous system 2, and autonomous system 3. The routing between the autonomous system is happening through inter-autonomous routing. Among the routers within an autonomous system, it is intra-autonomous system. In terms of BGP, we call it as IBGP, and this is all called as eBGP. And yeah, as we progress, we'll learn about that. And there is something called gateway routing. The gateway router connects with the router of the other autonomous system. So in the topology, which is shown on the screen, autonomous system 1 has got two border routers or gateway routers. One is connecting with autonomous system 2, and the other gets connected with autonomous system 3. We also have spoken about hot potato routing, where any router will try to get the least cost path, least hop count, in other words, here, to escape from your local autonomous system to the remote autonomous system for routing purpose. So that's called hot potato routing. So in the internet, we have got routing information protocol and OSPF. Link state routing protocol is OSPF, and your distance sector routing protocol is your RIP protocol. So some points about routing information protocol, it comes under DVRP. It uses only the hop count as the metric. Hence, the cost of each of the link is 1. And RIP also uses the term hop, okay, for the cost of the link. So the maximum cost path is limited to 15. Remember this number. If anything beyond 15 is termed as unreachable or not reachable by the routers of RIP. So 16 and other higher numbers are not reachable. So it can take only up to 15 hops, because the path, the cost of the link is the hop count. Hop. Okay, and routing advertisements are sent every 30 seconds. We call it as hello timer or advertisement. And each router maintains a routing table called RIP table. And if a router does not hear from its neighbor for at least every 180 second, okay, every 30-second hello message is sent. Even after 6 times you have sent, you haven't got the response, you will not send the 7th time. You will say that person is not reachable, and you will tell this to everyone. And of course, you have got your Poisson reverse and split horizon to avoid some issues related to the DVRP link, status updates. And it also uses UDP at port number 520. Hope you remember that. Then comes your open shortest path. First, you got your Dijkstra's shortest path algorithm comes into picture. Here, the router broadcasts the routing information to all the routers, not just the neighboring routers. That's the keyword, because in the distance sector routing protocol, they exchange the routing information with their neighboring routers. Okay, and other things, periodic updates are also available for every 30 minutes, and even if the link state is not changed. But whenever there is a change in the link, then the link state information is updated using the LSU packets, link state update packets, if you learn about OSPF in detail. But OSPF has a little more advantage than your RIP protocol. It supports the security. You also have got authentication, either using message regist 5, or it can be simple authentication having password, which can be sent, which is sent in a plain text. Then multiple same cost path is also possible in OSPF. It installs both in the routing table, and it also supports hierarchy within single domain. So you have got the area when you are configuring the OSPF. So you can go for multiple area, multi-area OSPF, where you can also attach the hierarchy. This is just to reduce the burden of exchanging the routing information across all the routers in the network. Okay, so all your routing information are exchanged within a group, smaller group of routers. So your hierarchical routing comes into picture to support that. Okay, what is an inter-autonomous routing? So far we have spoken about intra-autonomous, that is the RIP and OSPF. and the protocol which are going to talk is also BGP, that is Border Gateway Protocol, and we use BGP4. Um, so what are the capabilities BGP is providing to the autonomous system? It gives the reachability information to the subnet from neighboring autonomous system. So from any router, you'll be able to connect with any other network. It may be available in the neighboring autonomous system or with the remote autonomous system. Okay. And within the autonomous system, every of the router should have the reachability information that is also taken care by BGP. And also to determine the good routes, all right, based on the autonomous system policy and the reachability information. And I also have given you the hint, only in BGP we speak about autonomous system policy. So policy based routing is supported in BGP. And okay, BGP, we have learnt about the basics. It's extremely complex, but the configuration is very simple. And it uses TCP port number 179, and we have BGP peers. If router 1C and 1B is able to talk to each other, they are called as neighbors. Once they have established a TCP connection among them, that they both become BGP peers. 1C and 2A cannot become peer, but 1C and 1D, 1C and 1A can become, because it's a mesh connection. In case between 1C and 1D, if you don't have the direct connection, they cannot make a BGP peer, because BGP peering can happen only with your neighboring routers. And also BGP allows the CADR prefix. It supports discontiguous network, CADR network, and also supports the supernetting or the summary networking. That's also available. Okay, we spoke about the eBGP sessions, and within the autonomous system, we have got the iBGP system, and we have learnt about how some autonomous system gets the autonomous system number. Is it through IANA or any other organization or institute it is getting? Is there any payment required? Please go through that. Though there are multiple BGP attributes are available for the policy routing, two major attributes are autonomous system path and next hop. Autonomous system path, yeah, autonomous system path helps you to prevent the routing loop. All right, so that helps you because it's something. The logic is something similar to your Poisson reverse, where if you get a routing update from one autonomous system, you are not going to send the same routing information back to the same autonomous system. And yeah, that's what the second one. Okay, if it sees the autonomous system is contained in the path list, it rejects the advertisement. It's not taken up further. All right, so next hop routing information, next hop path is also very interesting one, specifically for the hot potato routing. You know what is the hot potato routing and so on. Um, so we know about this, so I go for the next one. And router selection, route selection is another important point which BGP is using. We have got the elimination rule. There are 4 steps by which tie is broken to find the preferred route to be installed within your routing table. And routing policy, because BGP takes the responsibility of connecting the ISPs. Now they also have to understand the policies. So policy based routing is supported by BGP, as we have learned. And in this topology, I remember speaking about um, the network X. Network X is not going to forward any packet which belongs to network W, because network X is not the ISP service receiver of the autonomous system A or the ISP A and so on, right? So they also have their own policy and protocols, whether to support or not, whether to forward the packet or not, based on the policy. All right, so that's the end of the second phase. Moving on. So the next topic would be your link layer and its services. I have spoken about the link layer, especially on this using this network diagram, if you remember it. where in earlier cases in the application layer or in the transport layer or the network layer, we speak about multiple networks. But in the link state protocol, we speak about only your local area network, specifically about only the links between the devices. Okay, and we speak about the load node. Also, we also speak about the connectivity between the devices, which is called as link. And the link layer frame is spoken a lot in the data link layer, because framing is an important process which happens at the link layer of the OS reference model, right? Framing. Second one is the link access. As I mentioned earlier, your data link layer takes the responsibility to connect your software with the hardware. All right. So far, we have all the software implementation, TCP, and everything is software implementation, where a piece of information is given, you do the checksum, you check the source IP, destination IP, a lot of games are happening, but it is the link layer which makes all things happen, because at the data link layer, you have just below the data link layer, you got the only the physical layer where only the electrical signals are the the light signals or radio frequency are exchanged. From that, everything has to be converted into normal zeros and ones, and the data has to be pushed to the upper layer. So link layer is very crucial one. All right, so it also supports the medium access in the shared medium specifically. Point-to-point access also available, specifically when you have a router connected to the other router straight away, then it's going to be point-to-point link. All right, and you also have the reliable delivery. A local error correction is available. Yes, it's needed. It's available by the frame check sequence, or also the trailer portion of your data link layer. All right, so we also have seen why error is possible in the data link layer. Yes, and link layer is implemented in the network interface card, and you could see how from the physical layer data is received, it is converted, it is it is taking a shape before it's forwarded to the network layer, and vice versa. When it comes from network layer, what happens to that, so that the physical layer can understand it. All right, moving on, error correction and detection bits technique. There are three things: parity check, a checksum, and cyclic redundancy check. CRC video I'm yet to upload, probably I'll do it today. But parity check and checksum we have calculated odd parity and even parity. Then you also have got two-dimensional parity. Yes, two-dimensional even parity. You may expect one or two problems here in the checksum and parity calculations. So checksum is very similar to your TCP or UDP checksum, and CRC I'll be uploading you the document shortly. So what happens in the multiple access? There are two major things: point-to-point link. The other one is the broadcast link, and we worry a lot about the broadcast link rather than the point-to-point link. So triple P, that is point-to-point protocol, is a very famous one in the point-to-point link, and also your HTLC, that is high-level data link control, is the other technology supporting the point-to-point. So where do we have the broadcast? If it is Ethernet, if it is wireless, or it is any other shared medium, is we call it as a broadcast link, where we need to learn about the multiple access protocols, right? So I also have spoken about the collision. I remember explaining the collision using the hub and switch topologies, where even unicast packet using the hub, it is possible to have collision, and because of the shared medium, when more than one person starts communicating, obviously there is a collision. So medium access control plays a major role. There are three major classification. One is channel partitioning, random access, and taking turns. In other words, in other classification, you take another one layer in between. One is contention free, the other one is contention based. In contention based, you fight with somebody. That's the logic in contention based. In contention free, you don't do that. Somebody helps you. There is a specific policy and rules available to you. Okay, that's about the different classification. What are the desirable characteristics of a multiple access protocol? Though these are all the desirable or ideal expectation from a multiple access protocol, unfortunately no one is existing. So when only one node is sending the data, the whole bandwidth has to be used. When there is more than one node, it has to be equally divided among those number of nodes. If it is m, the bandwidth has to be divided by m, the total bandwidth. The protocol also has to be decentralized, and it also has to be simple so that it can be implemented. Okay. What are the major class again under channel partitioning? You got your TDM, time division multiplexing, frequency division, code division. All right. So in time division multiplexing, the channel is divided into different frames or slots, and then every channel, every station is permitted to send the data in that specific slot. If it is on a round robin basis, and if it also follows the weighted round robin, more than one slot can be given to a specific station. But it also suffers with the drawbacks of limited average sending rate. Okay, the throughput is very much limited, and also persons have to wait. Even in this case, if station 1 is sending here, station 2, 3, and 4 have no data to send. Station 1 has to wait for its turn to come, wasting the bandwidth and also wasting the time. In the case of frequency division, instead of time, the frequency is divided, but end result is going to be same. You are given a very little bandwidth. Earlier in the previous case, it was R, but it is R by N. So the effect is same, and also the drawbacks also remain the same. In the case of code division multiple access, everyone is permitted to send it simultaneously, and every station is assigned a specific code so that it can be decoded at the receiver side. Not much of technical input is given on CDMA. It is left to the reader or the students or the faculty for their knowledge enhancement. Okay, and probably the final presentation which I have today is our multiple access protocol. The one is partition we have spoken. Second one is the random access protocol. Somewhat it is trying to match the requirement of um, um, your ideal medium access control protocol, where every node is transmitting at the full speed of R, but it's not happening all the time. Okay, when there is something called collision, but there should not be collision so that you can realize the maximum bandwidth of R. So when there is a collision, each node have to find out how we can circumvent this, or how can we come out of this problem, has to be taken care. The very famous one is for slotted aloha, where very similar to your time division multiple access, your time slot is divided into different frames here, having the size of the L bits. Generally, a single frame can be fit into that L. So bandwidth is divided into L by R. I'm sorry, the time is divided into L by R seconds. And every node is sending the data only at the start of the frame. All right. If there is a collision, then it should be known to everyone. But anyway, these are all the assumptions. But how is it operation? Okay, very simple. Have the data? Yes. Wait for the frame to start, send it. If there is a collision, yes, wait for the subsequent frame, probably, of course, with the random amount of time. If there is no collision, success. All right. So the advantage here is it is decentralized. There is no one to manage it. Very simple protocol. Send it. Just wait for this one slot to start, and you also can use the full potential. This is a very, very optimistic one. But in practice, there are a lot of troubles. When if you look at this NAT chart, Gantt chart, you can see only the node 2 specifically at this slot it is success. All others are failures. Collision slot is a failure. Empty slot is a failure one. All right. So in this case, only slot yes is successful. All others are failure. And of course, we have got another 2 here, success. Rest are failure. Okay. These are all the disadvantages here. In the case of pure Aloha, the only change is the time is not divided into frames. Logic is, have you got a frame to send? That is from the network layer. It has come, and now you have got the frame in the data link layer. Do you have it? Send it. If there is a collision, wait for some random amount of time. We call it as a random backoff time, and then you send it. So we have spoken about how the detection is happening in the case of carrier sense multiple access, which is the improvement from that. Before you have the data, before you start sending the data, you better check the carrier. We call it as sensing the carrier. If it's free, you send it. Otherwise, don't do that. Okay, that is carrier sense multiple access. A minor variation is collision detection. If you detect a collision, wait, sir, abort your transmission, wait for random amount of time, and then send it. That is called collision detection. What is the random amount of time? Is it smaller one or bigger one? Smaller one will give you the headache. that you will sense the carrier often its collision. If it is a large amount, you may underutilize the bandwidth. So we go for the binary exponential backoff timer, a famous one. Don't miss this keyword. All right. It also includes raise the number of collisions. So if the number of collisions become big, there is a heavy chance that the backup timer value also will increase, because it takes from probability from a wide range of timing. So the final one is the taking turns protocol. You got the polling and taken token passing protocol. In polling, there is a node elected as the poller, who will be dictating others who has to send, who is not supposed to send. All right, one of the nodes will be master node, and drawback is the polling delay, because the time which you take to send the packet instruction or the control messages which are exchanged, and that is going to waste your time. A second one, there is a single point of failure if the polar is dislodged from the network, or he leaves the network, or he's removed from the network. There is a single point of failure, polling fails. And the next comes your token passing protocol. I have spoken about token ring here, where a single piece of code is exchanged in a specific angle, whether it is in the clockwise or anti-clockwise. The small token are exchanged among the devices. All right. And then whoever is having the token are permitted to send the packet. So you also suffer with drawbacks, that the token may be lost. The node after getting the token may shut down. This again suffers with single point of failure. All right. So other things, switched LAN and ARP and the further topics, Ethernet, are not included for your third IA, but which will certainly feature in your end semester examination. And as per the guidelines, if you receive for the fourth IA, if it is there for any student, then that also will be there. All right. So thank you. I stop here.